Rain smudged the windshield as Maggie's SUV coughed its final breath along a deserted Vermont highway. The only light ahead? A single flicker from an old garage sign. She let out a shaky breath and turned off the ignition, though the engine had already gone quiet on its own. The dashboard lights dimmed with a low click, leaving her and the children surrounded by fog and failing light. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Gracie stirred in the back seat, rubbing her eyes. "Are we stopping, Mommy?" Lucas leaned forward from the passenger seat, squinting through the windshield. "I think the car just died." Maggie nodded once. "Yeah," she murmured, her voice thick. "She's done." Cold crept in quickly. Maggie zipped her coat, then turned to the back seat and gently helped Gracie into hers. Lucas was already pulling on his hoodie. "There's a light," he said, pointing ahead. Through the mist, just past a crooked pine, a neon glow buzzed. Maggie squinted. A weathered garage sign blinked erratically. Whitlock Auto. Inside the garage, Johnny Cash's voice rasped from a dusty radio. "I keep a close watch on this heart of mine." They walked, shoulders hunched against the drizzle, Maggie clutching Gracie's mittened hand, while Lucas carried a small backpack. Wet leaves stuck to their shoes. The road was empty, and each step echoed with the soft crunch of gravel and damp soil. The garage was old, wood siding grayed from years of weather, one window taped with cardboard, and a rusted oil drum perched by the door. Maggie hesitated before raising her hand to knock. A moment later, the door creaked open. A tall man in a thick flannel and grease-stained jeans stood framed by flickering fluorescent lights. He had a rag slung over his shoulder, hands dark with oil. His eyes were tired but alert. He didn't speak, just looked at the woman, then the kids, then back to her. "I'm sorry," Maggie said quickly. "The car, it quit back up the road. We don't have signal and—" She swallowed. "We didn't know where else to go." Henry scratched his chin, leaving a smudge. "No tow till morning. Weather's wrong for work tonight." "I understand." She shifted on her feet. "Do you have somewhere we could wait, just for a bit?" He stared a moment longer, then turned, leaving the door open behind him. "Follow me." The kids looked up at her. Maggie nodded and nudged them inside. The garage smelled of pine sawdust, rubber, and old oil. The radio crackled behind a workbench cluttered with bolts and tools. A small space in the back had a rickety cot, a dusty space heater, and a patchwork quilt draped over the side. A ceramic mug sat half-filled on a crate beside it, long cooled. "You can wait there," Henry said, nodding to the corner. "Ain't much, but it's dry." "Thank you." Maggie led the children toward the cot, stripping their wet coats. Lucas helped Gracie off with her boots. The girl shivered. The room creaked as wind pressed against the walls. Gracie huddled close to her brother, eyes wide. Henry returned a moment later, holding something in his arms. Without a word, he handed Maggie a red and black flannel shirt. Soft, worn. She wrapped it around Gracie, who sighed and curled into it. Maggie looked up. "Thank you," she whispered. Henry gave a small nod, then disappeared through the workshop doorway. Later, as the space heater hummed and Lucas leaned against the wall beside his mother, he whispered, "What if he's bad?" Maggie pulled the flannel tighter around Gracie's small shoulders. "We're just here to rest, that's all." Footsteps returned. Henry stepped through the workshop again, carrying a tray with 3 chipped mugs. Steam curled gently from each. He set them on the crate, careful not to spill, then turned and walked back toward the shadows. Henry brings them 3 chipped mugs of cocoa. Says nothing. Just places them on a crate and walks back into the shadows. Gracie's giggle echoed through the garage as she found a cat curled in an old tire. "Can we keep it?" she asked. "It's not mine," Henry muttered, but he never left. The cat blinked once and didn't move. Gracie crouched beside it, resting her cheek against the cool rubber, her little fingers stroking its side. Lucas looked over from the workbench where Henry was sorting tools into a metal tray. "That cat looks half asleep," he mumbled. Henry didn't answer. He just kept working, a wrench in one hand, a rag in the other. The garage door was rolled halfway open, letting in the soft gray light of a cloudy Vermont morning. The smell of bacon drifted from the diner across the street, cutting through the scent of oil and rust. Maggie stood near the doorway, drying her hands on a paper towel. She'd washed the garage sink, cleared the counter, and swept up the dust clumps tucked behind the air compressor. She wasn't the kind to sit still when something needed doing. The heater from the night before was now turned off. In its place, a percolator hissed softly on a small portable burner. "You didn't have to," Henry said quietly, glancing once at the now clean shelves. "I know," Maggie replied, tying her hair back with a rubber band she found in her coat pocket. "I did it anyway." Lucas moved closer to the car. "What's wrong with it?" "Gasket's toast," Henry muttered. He wiped his hands and pulled open the hood. "Parts'll take a couple days, maybe more if the roads stay flooded south of Rutland." "Can I help?" Lucas asked, standing on his toes. Henry paused, then handed him a socket wrench. "Hold that, don't drop it." Lucas grinned and gripped the tool tight. Near the corner of the workbench, Maggie spotted something hidden behind a row of dusty cans. She reached over and carefully pulled it out. A photo frame. The glass was cracked in one corner, the edges smudged with grime. Inside was an old picture. A younger Henry, clean-shaven and smiling, stood beside a woman with her arm around his waist. A small girl, maybe 4, perched on his shoulders, her curls wild and bright. She didn't say anything, just looked, then set it back down exactly where it had been. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Keller arrived carrying a basket wrapped in a checkered towel. "Muffins," she announced, setting it on the hood of a rusted Ford pickup. "I figured the little ones might be hungry, or you. Don't know if you even eat regular, Henry." He grunted. "Appreciate it." She eyed Maggie with a polite smile. "You folks staying long?" "Just until the car's fixed," Maggie said quickly. Mrs. Keller nodded, lips pursed. "Well, it's good to see movement in this place. Been quiet too long." As she turned to leave, she added, "Used to be Henry's girl would play out front. Drew pictures on the concrete with sidewalk chalk, always cats." The rest of the day passed in quiet rhythms. Gracie napped under a blanket in the corner. Lucas continued to ask questions while holding Henry's flashlight. Maggie fixed a small dinner on the same burner that had made the coffee. Just potatoes and beans, but it was warm. As they sat on overturned crates, Maggie handed Henry a chipped plate and said, "Thanks for not asking questions." He raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. "I don't like them either." He nodded once, a slow, deliberate movement. Gracie leaned her head against Maggie's arm, and the cat curled beside her without protest. As night crept in and the radio softened to nothing but static, Henry rose from his chair and crossed the garage. He opened a drawer, pulled something out, and paused by the back door. "She liked cats, too," he said softly. Then he stepped outside into the drizzle. That night, as the kids sleep, Henry stands outside in the drizzle, holding the old photo. He lights a cigarette, then lets it die in the rain. Someone dropped off a dish of meatloaf wrapped in foil at the garage door. A note read, "For the kids, if they're staying." The foil steamed faintly in the morning chill, and Maggie stared at it for a long second before picking it up. No signature, no return address, just blocky handwriting and barely legible ink where moisture had begun to bleed the letters. Inside, Lucas and Gracie sat cross-legged on the shop floor, playing with bolts and spare washers Henry had given them in a tin. The cat dozed in a sunbeam stretching through the front window, its tail twitching with each gust of wind that pressed against the glass. Maggie set the food on the workbench. "Someone left this. You think it's safe?" Henry glanced at it without stopping his sanding. "Looks like Claire James's writing. She's got 6 grandkids and a thing for meatloaf. You'll be fine." Lucas looked up. "Are we staying?" he asked, quiet, almost to himself. Maggie didn't answer. That night, she covered the children with Henry's spare wool blankets, tucking the edges gently beneath their chins before easing herself down onto the folded cot nearby. By week's end, Maggie had taken a short shift at the diner across the street. She wore an old brown apron that once belonged to a girl named Shelley, who'd left for Maine and served coffee with a kind of smile that said she was grateful for the distraction. She didn't talk much, but she listened, especially when the customers didn't think she was. "So Henry's got visitors, huh?" one older man muttered to his wife. "Thought he'd boarded that place up for good." Another voice. "She's got 2 kids. Wonder what she's really after." The waitress beside Maggie, a woman with thick glasses and hands that never stopped moving, leaned over during a lull and said, "Don't take it personal. This town's got a habit of whispering into their coffee." Back at the garage, Henry let Lucas follow him like a shadow. The boy was small for 9 but focused, asking questions that mattered. "Why do spark plugs have numbers? Why's that bike frame bent? Is rust ever good?" Henry showed him how to hold a wrench properly. Firm, not tight. You're not fighting it, just guiding it. And let him patch a busted inner tube on a kid's bike someone had abandoned 2 summers ago. Lucas beamed when it held air. Gracie, meanwhile, had made the cat her personal project. She named him Mittens, despite his fur being all gray, and crafted a collar out of string and a bread twist tie. She talked to him like he answered back, and in her world, maybe he did. Maggie had turned the corner of the garage into something resembling a kitchen, a portable burner, a cooler for perishables, and a wooden crate stacked with dented canned goods. That afternoon, she baked cornbread in a battered cast-iron pan. The scent of butter and cornmeal floated out the half-opened bay door, catching Mrs. Keller mid-walk. "Smells like fall in there," the older woman called with a half-smile. "You've got good instincts." Maggie smiled back but didn't respond. She was starting to learn the rhythm of the town, praise in passing, judgment from a distance. Later that evening, Henry walked across the street to pick up an oil filter. At the diner counter, a teenager in a red vest took the order and nodded toward the corner. "She's working here now," he said, jerking his chin. "That Maggie woman, guy from New Hampshire, called earlier. Asked if she was here." Henry's hand paused mid-signature on the receipt. That night, as the rain picked up and Gracie curled into Maggie's lap, Henry stepped into the kitchen space. He handed over a screwdriver Lucas had left near the jack and leaned his hip against the doorframe. "They're talking," he said. Maggie looked up. "At the diner, around town, wondering what you're doing here, wondering what you want." She didn't say anything. He glanced toward the children. "Let 'em talk," he said. "They did when I buried my family, too." The room went still. The cat stirred slightly and settled again. Somewhere down south, just past the Vermont welcome sign, a rest stop glowed faintly under fluorescent lights. A man leaned against the hood of a black SUV, phone in hand. He zoomed in on the image. A woman and 2 children outside a diner, blurry but recognizable. Roy is seen at a Vermont rest stop, checking a photo on his phone. Maggie and the kids. Roy Callahan stepped from his polished black SUV, shoes too shiny for Maple Glen's dirt lot. "I'm looking for Maggie Dwyer," he told the gas station clerk, voice smooth and practiced. The clerk, a high school junior with acne and a name tag that read Joel, blinked twice before pointing across the street. "Diner," he said. "She's got the morning shift." Roy adjusted his coat collar and gave a thin smile. "Thank you." His shoes crunched over loose gravel as he crossed the lot. The diner's bell jingled overhead as he stepped inside. The smell of burned coffee, bacon grease, and something sweet hung in the air, maybe peach pie, maybe old syrup. At the far end of the counter, Maggie froze mid-pour. The coffee in her hand sloshed slightly over the rim of the mug. "Hello, Maggie," Roy said. She put the carafe down carefully and straightened. "I'm working." "That's obvious," he said, removing his gloves 1 finger at a time. "I'd like a word." The waitress beside her, Carol, with thinning gray curls and a weathered jaw, watched quietly, wiping down the counter without looking up again. "I don't have anything to say to you," Maggie said flatly. Roy leaned in just enough. "You took my brother's kids and ran. That's not something you can keep quiet forever." "I protected them," she hissed. "From his debt, from his drinking, from you." He clicked his tongue once, eyes scanning the diner. "And now what? Playing house with a mechanic in a garage that should have been condemned 5 years ago?" She stepped back. "You don't get to talk about him. You didn't come to his funeral." "I was managing the mess he left behind," Roy said coldly. "Now I'm cleaning up yours." He dropped a business card on the counter. "I've filed for emergency custody. You'll be hearing from the court. Might want to start packing." Then he left, the door jingling again as he disappeared into the sharp wind. Later that afternoon, Gracie tugged at Henry's sleeve and handed him a picture she'd drawn on the back of a shipping invoice. Crayons borrowed from the diner's lost and found box had made blocky figures, a garage, a cat, a car with a flat tire, and 4 smiling faces. "That's you," she said, beaming. "You fixed our car." And Mom's smile. Henry looked down at the drawing, his jaw working quietly. He didn't say anything, but folded the paper and slid it into his back pocket. Back at the garage, Maggie moved quickly, too quickly. She gathered socks and cans, folded shirts, tried to keep her hands from shaking. Henry stood near the tool cabinet, arms crossed. "You leaving?" "I have to," she said, stuffing clothes into a duffel. "He's got lawyers, money. I've got this." "This," Henry said slowly, "isn't nothing." "He'll drag us through court," she snapped. "He'll say I'm unstable, that I ran, that I live in a garage." "You do," Henry said, not unkindly, "but it's warmer than any house he'd put you in." Maggie paused. Her eyes were glassy, her voice barely audible. "I can't lose them." "You won't." She stared at him. He added, quieter this time, "Running's for folks with nowhere to go, but you've got this place now." In the corner, Lucas stood silently with his duffel bag clutched to his chest. A beat passed. Then, without a word, he turned and unzipped it. Slowly, deliberately, he began putting his clothes back in the drawer beside the cot. The wind howled low outside. Overhead, the diner's neon flickered on. Maple Glen's harvest market banners flapped against power poles. Corn husk wreaths swayed under gray skies. That evening, Henry tightened bolts on the shop's front door and turned off the overhead lights one by one. The hum of the street lamp outside was louder now, the town holding its breath. There was a knock. Sheriff Boone stood in the frame, hat in his hands. "He wasn't bluffing," the sheriff said. Callahan filed. "Court dates the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Orders came through this afternoon." Henry nodded once. Didn't thank him. Just closed the door. Inside, the shop was quiet. The kids were asleep. Maggie sat beside the workbench, rubbing her hands together. Henry moved to his bench, pulled out a piece of wood, and began to carve. Outside, drizzle began to fall. Henry sits at the garage bench, alone that night, whittling something small. A whisper escapes. "I won't lose them, too." The courthouse smelled like lemon polish and old fear. Maggie clutched Gracie's mittened hand. Henry adjusted his cleanest flannel. The hallway buzzed with the low murmur of old radiators and scuffed shoes on linoleum. Lucas walked slightly behind, silent but steady. In his pocket, the small wooden carving Henry had given him, an oak leaf with carved veins pressed against his palm. "For luck," Henry had said that morning, handing it over without ceremony. They entered the courtroom together. Dimly lit, with tired wooden benches and faded flags, the place felt less like justice and more like a waiting room for disappointment. Judge Marlin sat at the bench already, thick glasses low on his nose, thumbing slowly through a manila folder. Roy Callahan was already seated with his attorney, a young woman in sharp gray, heels tapping like clockwork. Roy's smile was thin, controlled. He didn't look at Maggie. He didn't need to. The hearing began without drama. Papers shuffled. Judge Marlin cleared his throat. Mr. Callahan, you're requesting emergency custody of 2 minors. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Roy said, his voice full of measured concern. My late brother's children. They were taken across state lines by their mother-in-law without due process. She is, to my knowledge, living in an auto garage with no legal residence, no income, and no stability. The judge looked toward Maggie. Mrs. Dwyer, your response. Maggie's voice was tight. They weren't safe with him, Your Honor. Their father left us with debts, no money, and, she glanced at Roy, a brother-in-law who cared more about property than people. The attorney rose. Objection to editorializing. Noted, the judge said, raising one hand. Stick to facts, please. Henry sat silently, arms folded across his lap, eyes locked on a smudge on the floor. When asked to identify his relationship to the children, he answered plainly, shelter, mechanic, neighbor. Do you have custody rights, Mr. Whitlock? The attorney pressed. No, ma'am. Have you ever been convicted of a crime? Henry looked up, steady. DUI, 19 years ago, paid the fine, lost my license for 6 months, never touched a drink since. The judge made a note. Maggie's hands trembled. Lucas leaned against her slightly. Gracie swung her legs under the bench. There was a pause. Then, from the gallery, a voice. Excuse me, Your Honor, Mrs. Keller said, standing carefully. I'm not on any list, but I'd like to speak. The judge nodded. She stepped forward slowly, gripping her purse with both hands. I've lived in Maple Glen 42 years. That man, she pointed gently toward Henry, gave shelter when no one else would. That woman, she turned to Maggie, makes cornbread for folks she's never met. And those kids, they're cleaner and calmer now than they were when they arrived. Next came Pastor Evelyn, straight-backed and sharp-eyed. I've watched Maggie teach her daughter to pray and her son to fix things he didn't break. She's raising those children with more love than some folks ever see. Even Sheriff Boone stood. Callahan's right about one thing, he said. They're not related, but some things mean more than blood. The judge exhaled. He tapped his pen once, twice. Mr. Callahan, you've provided no evidence of abuse or neglect. The mother has no criminal record. The children are not truant, and your claim of instability is subjective at best. Roy started to object, but the judge cut him off. Motion denied. The children remain in Mrs. Dwyer's care. This hearing is closed. The gavel came down. Outside, Maggie sat in the car, hands covering her face. Her shoulders shook, but no sound came. Henry stood nearby, one hand on the roof of the car, saying nothing. Lucas sat beside his mother, gripping her hand gently. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. That night, back at the garage, Lucas was already curled in bed when Henry approached quietly. He handed the boy a folded scrap of paper. Lucas opened it. Scrawled in Henry's uneven handwriting, "You make this place louder. I didn't know how much I needed that." The garage never smelled like turkey before, but today it carried roasted rosemary, mashed potatoes, and something Maggie called hope. Steam curled from the cracked window above the workbench, carrying the warmth of gravy and baked apples into the cold morning air. Strings of mismatched lights hung from the rafters, their soft glow dancing over a long table assembled from sawhorses, crates, and a door laid flat. Folded paper leaves in orange, red, and gold lined the center, and a few hand-drawn turkeys fluttered where Gracie had taped them to the window with painter's tape. Henry walked back in from the market just after 10, a tiny pumpkin tucked under one arm. The vendor had insisted. "For your windowsill," she said with a wink, pushing it into his hands before he could argue. He placed it carefully beside the toolbox near the back, wiped his hands on a dish towel, and opened the oven door. The smell of roasted herbs filled the space, deep and savory. The turkey looked fine. Still, he poked the thermometer again, just to be sure. Gracie buzzed around the garage like static, checking the table settings for the 5th time. "Forks on the left, knives on the right," she muttered to herself. Maggie gently corrected her once, then let her run the rest of the show. Maggie wore an old canvas apron. It had belonged to her late husband, but today she wore it without weight. Her hair was pulled back with a paisley handkerchief, and flour dusted the side of her cheek. She moved with lightness, graceful, without hesitation. Lucas helped Mrs. Keller carry in a pie tin covered with wax paper. "Don't you dare peek till it cools," she warned with a wink. He grinned. No promises. The garage was fuller than it had ever been. Neighbors flowed in slowly, one by one. Folding chairs appeared. Someone brought a jug of cider. A box of record albums was set near the corner, and Henry's old radio wheezed to life with faint strains of Sam Cooke. Maggie passed Henry a small envelope before the meal began. "Here," she said simply. Inside was a photo. Him, the kids, and the garage cat curled on a windowsill. Lucas's eyes were mid-laugh. Gracie had frosting on her nose, and Henry, he looked almost surprised to be in the picture at all. He stared at it longer than necessary. Maggie didn't say anything else. Later, as plates filled and conversation swelled around the table, Henry stood and tapped his glass. The room quieted. "I don't say much," he began, voice low, "but you all filled a place I didn't know was still empty." A few heads nodded, a few eyes shone. Pastor Evelyn stood. "Sometimes," she said, lifting her cup, "the best families are the ones we build from the broken." Gracie clapped once before remembering to sit still. Lucas leaned over toward Henry. "Is it okay if I call you Dad now?" Henry didn't speak, couldn't. He just nodded, slow and sure, his eyes glassy but unblinking. The sun dipped low. The plates emptied. Someone started humming a hymn near the door. The cat wandered across Maggie's lap and settled on her feet. Later that night, when everyone had gone and the kids were asleep, Henry and Maggie sat on overturned crates outside. The cold bit gently at their cheeks. "Think they'll remember this?" she asked. Henry replied, "I will." On Thanksgiving, in a garage that once held only silence and rust, the sound of laughter and clinking plates echoed like a song long forgotten. What began as a quiet shelter became a chosen home where a man once hardened by loss found his heart opened by simple trust and small hands. Kindness doesn't always wear a smile or arrive with grand gestures. It often comes quietly, wrapped in flannel and silence, asking nothing in return. And when we stop judging by appearances, we may just uncover the people who were meant to be our family all along. Like the warm light left glowing in a workshop window, even the gentlest acts of care can guide someone home.